Today's program is part of a special series brought to you by St. Agnes Medical Center and Every Neighborhood Partnership, with funding provided by ACEs Aware. Together, we are working to raise awareness about the effects of adverse childhood experiences in hopes of building a healthier community and a brighter future for our children. Dr. B explains the importance of acknowledging our stressors of the past in order to thrive in the present. Plus, she shares practical tips for coping through challenging times and building greater resiliency so you and your family can enjoy healthier and more fulfilling life.
Hi, you're listening to Delusional Optimism with Dr. B,
where we explore human resiliency
and learn how people thrive even after adversity.
We break down the complexities of the human brain so concepts are simple and relatable.
It's fun and empowering to understand how your earliest experiences
influence your relationships today.
What makes you tick?
Dr. B is a speaker, trainer, and consultant who understands emotions and human development from the inside out.
Let's dive into today's episode.
Here's Dr. B.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. B, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, but we're also going to be talking about middles. They're the age group that come after our littles, and they fall into the category of about 6 to 12 years old. If you're interested in furthering this conversation, email me at contact@drbconnections.com or check out my website at www.drbconnections.com. All right, let's get started.
All right, we're back with Dr. B, and today we're talking about middles. But before we get into that, you went on a trip recently. Is that correct?
I did, yes.
Where'd you go off to?
I ran up to Bass Lake with some family, my wife and my daughter and her husband, so my son-in-law and my granddaughter. We all stayed separately, but we at least got to do some outside adventuring together. It was a lot of fun to just be.
What was your favorite
outside.
moment?
My favorite moment was actually, well, there's so many favorite moments.
Sure.
Just spending time with the group again was amazing. It was so fun to just be out and about and able to wander with my granddaughter, Charlie, and talk to Lisa and Matt and Lainey, all just, free flow like we're so used to, and now has been so, we've been in deprivation mode. So it was just fun to have normal conversations outside. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Normalcy.
Yes.
Whoever thought it'd be missed.
I know, yeah. And we went to the snow and played in the snow because we don't live in a snow place. And so that was fun too.
All right. So what do we need to know about middle schoolers?
Middles. They're middles, and what a middle is, I call them middles. They're like 6-year-olds to 12-year-olds. So they're kind of in this period of life that we call latency. So they're like, if you think of a window being wide open and just air blowing into it, that's what a middle is like. This is your opportunity as a parent. They've gone through all that infancy stuff. The roadways are paved, or, we've talked about the highway building in the early childhood parts of life. Now information is really coming into their world as for the first time. And they're starting to learn so many new things and have so many opinions and ideas. And if you talk to a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, they're just amazing at what they know and what they're learning and how they think about things. They don't think about things the same way adults do. They have a different perspective because they have less experience in the world. And it's really important to remember that a lot of the things that are happening for them are happening for the first time ever, where, we've had a lot of experiences with things happening over and over again. So if they're excited, we need to join in that joy with them during this period, because for them, it's a first time. Middles are just pure. And especially young girls, they say young girls, the window is wide open until age 10. Like they're not influenced by as much as when they hit early adolescence,
Sure.
by the negativity of all the commercialism of being a beautiful woman and
Sure.
body image and all of those things. So everything that you want a girl to know as a parent or as a mentor, you want to be talking to them about that before they're 10.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool. I mean, it's true for boys too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but particularly because we have such an industry that exploits young women, we really want to get those messages into girls' brains before the window closes and doesn't reopen again until
Right.
they're in their 20s.
Yeah. Wow. Why is there such a range, like 6 to 12? I mean, we've been doing like smaller increments up to now. Why is 6 to 12 such a large window?
Because we've sort of, remember, 80% of brain development, the infrastructure of the brain has now been built by 6, really by even earlier than 6, really around 3. 80% of that infrastructure has been built. And now we're adding information in, and kids are starting to learn more of about life that gets put onto the roadways in terms of, okay, now I'm going to learn how to read. Now I'm going to learn how to, write, and just making more association kinds of things rather than building the system. So that's why early childhood is so important. And we look at it in these little micro bits because that's when we're building infrastructure.
Yeah.
So think of it as like building a computer. You're building the machine, but then for a long period of time you use that computer and you're adding information to it, and it goes into the right places for later use.
Or like you're coding from 6 to 12.
You're
Coding the
from
programs, coding the, okay. That makes sense. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, very nice.
It's kind of, I mean, I don't know a lot about the computer side of it, but that totally makes sense in terms of, it's the coding side, the information side.
The software,
The software side.
Yeah, the hardware side is the, like, from birth to 5, birth to 6,
For
something
sure.
like that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
And
Wow.
some of that can get tweaked, like in a computer, you can add storage or you can rewire something. So that can happen across the lifespan. However, the it's not going to work if you just turn over one wire.
Right.
You got to do
Yeah.
the main thing at the beginning, the first
It becomes
5.
a lot more crowded and complicated the
Yes.
later on you go. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, that makes sense. So are we just all computers? Are we getting into existential territory?
Yeah, I know. Well, we want to be relatable. And so because humans are so dynamic and we are social beings, and actually we are so socially connected in so many ways to our devices and our computers, that it's a really good association comparison. But in real life, we know that in order for computers to be human-like, they need social and emotional skills, and computers still do not have that. People trump computers big time when it comes to emotion, perception. I mean, we're trying very hard in the AI world, but it's not necessarily, you can't replicate a human in that department yet.
Yeah.
You can build something with a robot, but you can't make them feel like a human yet. So no, we're not humans. I mean, we're not robots or just computers yet.
Yeah.
We're still human, and we might get there someday.
So in this age range, what are the typical difficulties and confusion points that parents may come up against during these ages?
One of the biggest things that I notice all the time is that people see children between 6 and 12 as mini-me's or as little adults or as replicas of what they were like during the same time period when they were a child at 6. Well, let's start with the world is so different from when I was 6 to my granddaughter today being 6. The world is just completely different. So I can't compare my 6-year-old experience to her 6-year-old experience. But what I can know is that her experience is, I don't want to say immature because it's normal, but what we do is our brain is adaptable to the environment that we live in order to survive and in order to have loving relationships and exist as humans. So we have to have an adaptable brain. Well, this is the period where our brain is taking in experiences from today's world, not my experience as a 6-year-old.
Right.
So that's not relative. I was on a walk yesterday, taking my dogs for a walk, and there was a family walking. There was probably about a 4-year-old who was just crying in a stroller. And then there was maybe a 6 or 7-year-old pushing a bike. And first thing, and I don't want to be critical, but I see this happen all the time. One person, the woman in the group, said to the baby crying, and I say baby loosely, she was probably 4, said, "Why are you being such a crybaby?" You know?
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
and I get that
no.
parents can be frustrated by crying, but at the same time, it's a need, and when, and sometimes you just need to take the time because they're little and have so much less experience with the world that we would get further in terms of resilience if we say, okay, let's just pause here on our walk and let me help you regulate with me. Let's just both calm down for a minute because something's upsetting.
Right.
And then the man in the group, there were several adults, there were probably 4 adults. One of the men in the group said, "You don't know how to ride a bike? How old are you?" And I didn't, I was walking along, so I didn't hear, I just noticed the age of the child. And I thought, okay, knowing how to ride a bike a long time ago was such a different skill need than it is today. To be total, I can't stand bike riding. Like,
really?
I can't stand bike riding. Everyone is surprised that Dr. B does not want to be on a bike. We joke about putting me on a 3-wheeler, but really the truth is, I'm not so much afraid to ride a bike. I'm afraid of all the things that can happen on a bike. I'll fall, and I don't want to fall on a bike. And it's bound to happen at some point.
Sure.
Or I'm afraid I'll get hit by a car or somebody will, run me off the road or something. Totally freaks me out. The highest on the list of why I never want to ride a bike is I'm afraid of being chased by a dog. And I'm the queen of dogs. I love dogs, but I love my dogs and my dogs that are familiar to me, but I don't want to be chased by a dog. So the impracticality of my 6-year-old granddaughter riding her bicycle out in her front yard is completely different than it was for me where I lived when I was 6, or even where her parents lived, riding bikes. It's like I rode bikes a lot as a kid, all over the place. But then when my kids were little, they didn't ride bikes that much because we were afraid to let them go riding their bikes wherever. We were much more, remember, Gen X, we're helicopter parents. We bubble wrap them in. And now my little Char, she's 6 and she's super interested in riding a bike, but that requires riding a bike through the city, which isn't a super safe thing to do for a 6-year-old. So things are different, and I think what parents need to recognize is that they're not many me's, even though they look a lot. They look so competent, and they're still so little. They're still so young and don't have the frontal cortex online for logical and rational thinking and understanding. So we pull them into things that aren't necessarily, they're not capable of understanding.
So it's just, you're saying we pull them into bigger expectations than what they are actually capable of understanding and engaging.
We don't give them the opportunity to tell us and teach us what their capacity is. We just make a lot of assumptions. And so what I guess I want to say is, instead of making assumptions about what your child knows or doesn't know, be an investigator with them. Wonder with them about what they're thinking and how they understand things to work. Because then that gives us the information to help parent them better, because we then know what they're thinking and what they're asking. So I'll tell you a little story about Char, my granddaughter, and she's a little 6.5. And so we don't think kids know what they know, and then we also at the same time we over expect them to know things that how in the world would they know anything about. So it's really good to wonder with kids and invite them to tell us things in a safe way so we can clarify and clear things up. So as they're bringing in information, they have the ability to use it adaptively when they need it. So Charlie was at my house pre-COVID swimming, and she said, "Hey, BB," you know, she's worrying and thinking about death and dying. Obviously, this is on her mind, and she's a little bit of a gore queen for whatever reason. But she says to me, "Hey, BB, you want to see your worst nightmare?" And I said, Lord. Not really, but okay, you got me. I'm curious. What's my worst nightmare? And then she's literally learned to swim, you know, a year before. She floats face down in the swimming pool as if she has drowned. And then she pops her head up and she laughs, and I said, "Are you kidding me? That is my worst nightmare. How did you know that's my worst nightmare? I can't, that's why I'm sitting here watching you swim, because that would be my worst nightmare if you drowned." And she laughed from the tips of her toes to the top of her head. She thought that was so funny that she knew what would worry me, and then begged me to send the video to her mom and dad to scare them. And I said, "Absolutely not. I am not sending this to your mom and dad until I tell them it's your joke." And, you know, we've all gotten a laugh that, wow, it's a really deep thought to know that people love you so much that their worst nightmare would be if something terrible happened to you. In her case, she's at the age where kids are really obsessed with death and dying, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, even 9, 10, because we don't talk about it. We don't explain it because we also feel uncomfortable and don't understand how to talk about it. So we talk about it very abstractly. There's a really great book series I'll share with you. It's called A Kid's Book About. And in A Kid's Book About, they talk about everything. And Mr. Rogers has taught us, the late Mr. Rogers, he said, if you can talk about it, then we can manage it. And so the beauty of this series, they're written by all different authors. This one's a book about death. Okay, how do you talk to your 6 to 12-year-olds about death? Yeah. Here's a kid's book about systemic racism. So I'm meeting with them to write a book called A Book About Resilience on Monday. So
that's so exciting.
I'm so excited. God. Yeah. But it's because we can, and then there's a kid's book about failure, a kid's book about feminism, a kid's book about body image. It goes on and on. And different authors write about difficult topics for children, and particularly middles, because we need help as parents to talk about things that we don't know. Like, how do you talk about racism with a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old? Like, or systemic racism or feminism. These are hard topics. And so we want to have avenues to open up dialogue, but a lot of times nobody ever gives parents that option or information. So this book series is amazing for parents and children to share together. I think it's great to share with adults. Like, I've learned a lot just by reading this series of children's books as ways to talk to other parents about certain topics that are difficult to talk about. Anxiety in kids or depression. So middles are tricky, but they're amazing.
Yeah. I imagine being a parent when you're a parent of a middle, it requires you to search yourself a lot more than you're used to. Search for answers and language for things that you've just kind of forgotten about. Like, death is very strange. I mean, living is very strange, let alone death. But it also just makes me think of, on some level, like the ancient cultures that had more story around death and dying, more ritual, more things like that we've just become isolated from because we're uncomfortable with the idea that we aren't going to be here. And so we just want to just pretend it's not there. And I think, creating better stories, creating better rhythms and rituals for those difficult topics is the way that we're going to be able to get back to some sense of groundedness around these subjects for sure.
Yeah, well, and that's so true in relation to COVID even more so, because now people are dying in the rituals that the very, minimal rituals that we had around death and dying are now pushed off to the side and they're not able to be shared with family and friends the way they were pre-COVID. So you're right. And story is so important to middles because they have their contextual memory is online now. And so they can make associations about something that's happening and how somebody feels about it. And then gives them the idea of, oh, I'm allowed to have a feeling about this too. What do I think and feel about this?
Yeah.
And that's really important. You don't do that when you're a toddler. You don't do that when you're 3 or 4. That doesn't happen until you're a middle. So it's that storing of information in a way that makes sense and is organized, and you can pull for it later when you're 21 and need it again.
I have a friend and mentor teacher who her husband's brother died, and they gathered outside. They took like 5 minutes and went onto this property and grabbed something that reminded them of this guy and then shared with the group, and they cried and they wept. And it's something as simple as that. A kid can even do that, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a ritual that's going to be able to bring people together and acknowledge death, not escaping the reality, but leaning into it and learning to love it on some level, love each other better.
Right. Yeah. And looking at the idea that dying isn't only a taking away, but it is the leaving of another person's soul and their mark, which is what leave a life print really means, on all the people that someone has touched in their lives. Yeah. Everybody leaves life prints. They leave those life prints on the souls of all the people that they engage with, good and bad in the world, and say things to our children that, yes, I'm always going to be here with you in maybe not in body, but in spirit, whatever that means to you, whether it's in, a religious context, a spiritual context, or
scientific
whatever
context.
It's your way of saying, I'm leaving stuff in with you because we have a relationship. So you are part of who I am no matter what.
So I think another difficult part of this age is rules. And how do we set up rules and boundaries and teach them when to and how to obey them and express their feelings around those things? So how would you suggest people go about setting up those sort of things?
Okay. This is a great topic for middles, but it also applies to adults later on in life because
most definitely.
Middles are really concrete in terms of how they think about certain things, and particularly rules. And on the one hand, 6 to 12-year-olds on the earlier end really just are about, getting what's sort of fair, getting what I want, but it has to be kind of fair. So that's a really rule kind of oriented way of thinking. And then as we get into a little bit older childhood, it can shift a little to like interpersonal connection. Like I want to do what everybody else does and I want to do it right. Like I want to please my teacher. I want to please my parent. So I behave and follow the rules for that reason. So let's merge those two things together a little bit. in this span and recognize that if you have a 10-year-old, I used to teach 4th grade millions of moons ago. And so this is a classroom of 10-year-olds. Okay, there is nobody more literal or serious about the rules than a 10-year-old. And so I let my class make the rules, but I got to override their rules if I felt it necessary. And so what 10-year-olds will do is they will, send you to the electric chair if you break the rule on purpose. Because you should have known better, and we told you and we gave you a chance and you blew it, so you're done. Like, they have no mercy.
Yeah.
They're like done with you. So in that sense, like, there's very little flexibility in their thinking about this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah.
And where we come in, we're sort of the fluid in between as adults, and we give them the ability to smooth out those edges and say, yeah, well, maybe that is right or wrong, but what if the situation changed? And again, rather than giving them a laundry list of all the things that are right and wrong, we can help them think about a system. Now, the problem with this is that a lot of times adults aren't good at this either.
Right.
So we have to teach adults too, and sometimes we have to backtrack with adults and say, let's learn this together, that sometimes you can't follow the rules because the rules don't make sense, or the rules aren't good for everyone, or the rules aren't good for a certain situation. And so it's okay to adapt a rule, but you have to be careful about it. It's a tricky thing. But we don't want kids to grow up and be so stuck in the black and white of a rule that it ends up being harmful to other people. I'm going to use COVID-19 again, vaccines, as an example. This is a risky thing for me to talk about personally, but at the same time, I feel like I'm old enough, I'm a leader in this field, and I feel like it's important to say the rules need to meet the goal. And the goal is to get people vaccinated, because when we have people vaccinated, then we have people protecting other people from COVID-19. So if the rule prevents somebody from getting vaccinated, but then that vaccine is going to end up in the garbage, how is that rule effective or a good situation? Yeah. Now, we didn't come on to COVID-19 and vaccine and all of that in the most efficient way because it's an emergency. Right. My stance on this is, there's a lot of conversation about don't jump the line, don't, take somebody else's spot. And I would say, okay, I'm totally allowed to get a vaccine because I am a healthcare provider who does not see patients. That allows me to get a vaccine. Now, that doesn't help my friend who's African American and drives an Amazon truck at all, because they won't let me give him my vaccine. But he should have the vaccine before me because he's the one who's in contact with more people than I am.
Right.
So the rule doesn't make sense. But I shouldn't give my vaccine up because he can't get a vaccine yet. What I need to do is then say, hey, we're going to get you a vaccine. I see you as a healthcare provider, but, all of our jobs are to help other people who want to get a vaccine to get a vaccine, not stop ourselves from getting vaccines in order to let everybody go in front of you. Because in my case, there was nobody lining up for the vaccine. The vaccines were going to go into the garbage if somebody didn't show up to get them.
Yeah.
So that's one of those places where it feels a little terrible to bend the rules a little bit for other people. But at the same time, it's for the greater good in the long run. And this is what we're setting middles up for, is having that flexibility in their brain to negotiate the black and the white to having some gray zones. Like, oh yeah, it is okay to, if you're starving and your children are starving, is it okay to take a loaf of bread?
Right.
We all have to decide that. It's a moral dilemma. But does that mean looting is okay? No, it doesn't mean looting is okay.
Right.
So, there's a lot of complex things that happen in humanity that are okay to talk to kids about.
Yeah, and I think, structure. I was just having this conversation with a friend as well of like structures and rules, so important. But you really have to look at, like what you're saying is like, what is the fruit of the structures and these rules? And if the structures and rules are not giving you the fruit that you want, then maybe that we need to change the structure and the rules.
Right.
And that's really difficult. And especially, just there's so many variables. And of course, the rules are not going to cover every single variant of person. And so you just kind of have to slap on it and be like, well, this makes the most sense to cover the most ground, perhaps. But I'm sure people are going to be left out. I'm sure people are going to be missed. Yeah, you have to make that personal decision, and obviously don't go against your conscience. But is the goal, is the fruit that is coming out of this structure or this rule, is it actually serving what you're wanting? Being
okay with other people not agreeing, that's the first thing, because that makes us feel really uncomfortable. And so that's one of the things for middles is they're very socially driven by what other people think. So we can help them to have their own voice when they follow their own compass that's guided by a right and wrong system that has positive benefits for the most people. That's kind of the way I like to put it is, sure, we can all go take advantage of all kinds of systems because that's what loopholes are, taking advantage of the system. Sometimes it's really helpful, I don't want to say take advantage of a system, but to utilize a system in a way that makes sense for the benefit of the most people, because the system is not human. It's like asking the computer to say, oh, wait, do you think this person should have a vaccine, or do you think this person should have food? Oh, no, because that is wrong. Well, okay, then what are we left with? We don't want to leave that to the computer. So sometimes we have to think, the system is more like a computer than it is like a human. We need to stay true to our humanity and our humanness. And that's where the road gets gray. That's why we have this, from black to white, there's gray in the middle, and we navigate that with our values, our ethics, our morality, and that comes from conversations that we have with our elders, our people who we trust, love, and are wise.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more when you're working with these kids, it's less about teaching them how to follow the exact correct rules at all times and more about the ground underneath the structures. How do you know what the ground underneath the structure is? And sometimes you need to tear that structure down, but as long as you know that the ground, what the ground is and what the ground is standing for, that's a much more flexible concept it's allowed to shift and change. But if you know, like, the core root of we're trying to take care of people, how do we best take care of people, and then let the structure emerge from that again if the original wasn't working.
I think that's a beautiful way to talk about that, because we are in a period in our history where we're doing a lot of talking about breaking down systems and structures that are not working for us anymore. Whether they ever worked for everyone is pretty much a no. We know that. And what COVID has done is illuminated the discrimination, the racism, and the disparity in so many situations. So now we are at this weird crossroads, this very difficult crossroads of needing to break down systems. And at the same time, we don't necessarily know how to do that in ways without breaking the rules.
Right.
So we have to find our courage and our confidence and say, you know what? Yeah, sometimes you have to bend so you don't break.
Yeah.
So what we know is that middles are very much looking for this tight structure of rules so they know what to do and how things work. And that's important for them. So we don't want to get all philosophical on middles because their brain isn't online to work with that. However, we do want to start talking to them about how to make decisions about things that are a little bit blurry, because that then helps them to put that in their contextual memory system to use for later when it becomes really necessary. Like, do I help somebody or do I not because I'm scared? Or do I, like all these things that come up. So middles need a lot of structure and a lot of boundaries, and they need us to protect them because they don't have the capacity for that. But they also need us to be flexible because that fuels and feeds their flexible thinking later on. So we really have to step into our parenting role here and be not the just do it because I said so, but here's how I think about it. Let's talk about how you could think about it. We're really building and tensing and releasing the muscle of the brain that gives us the ideas of, how to be a flexible thinker and a smart thinker all at the same time.
So along the lines of these, of rules and knowing how to help a child of that age know where the flexibility is and how to handle that flexibility, what would be your advice to that?
That's a great point, because what I see in the world around where people get hung up and stuck is that we get so worried that the rules are followed exactly that we forget that the world is constantly changing all the time. So what we need to talk to kids about is the confusion that happens when things are different under similar circumstances. And what do we do with that confusion? Oh, that's different than trying to create a world that's completely identical, Legoland, at everybody else's house. My house is totally different for my granddaughter when she's visiting me than her own house is, because I don't have to, be the strict rule parent anymore.
Right.
So that's what we need to do, is be able to talk to kids about their confusion about different situations to build their flexibility, rather than spend our whole lives trying to create all these exact identical circumstances and situations for them to navigate through at everybody's house and make everybody do it all the same.
Yeah. This is the similar concept of unity, not uniformity.
Unity, not uniformity. Absolutely. What nice words to use with children. That, because we're naturally, we are adaptable. Like, that is the nature of our survival, is that we can adapt to our environment.
Exactly.
So we have to be united, which means shiftable and changeable, rather than continuously uniform. If we were all exactly the same thing, we'd be out.
Yeah, exactly.
We'd be done.
All right, so there's obviously so many hurdles, it sounds like, in parenting middles. Where's the point of resilience and optimism here?
I'm always optimistic when I get to just share about these things, and I can see the resilience in so many positive experiences that children in middles have. And when we have conversations with middles, we're building their resilience. That is what it is. We're teaching them to think about them. We're giving them the idea about the future and hope and ideas. And that's a way of building resilience into another human being. Yeah. So when we want to be parent for resilience, then we are communicators with children at their level. So that's true across the board. That's really true across every relationship that we have. But since we're building resilience in childhood, it's important to talk about the things, like Mr. Rogers said, that feel like they're unmanageable, but as soon as we bring them out into the open, we can manage it. Yeah. So that's why I'm optimistic and believe that this is going to lead to more resiliency in our whole world and community, or our communities and the world, because we are starting to have really difficult conversations about things that feel highly, highly unmanageable. Like, we've just had a conversation about breaking down systems that have been in existence for hundreds of years,
right,
and literally rebuilding them. That can be scary, but it's also important and necessary in a lot of circumstances. So how do we do it? What do we do? And, how do we do it in a way that serves everybody, not just a particular group of people,
right,
whatever that group of people is. So let's talk about a few actionable takeaways. One is, remember, we've built the infrastructure in the first 5 years-ish of life, and now we're 6 to 12, and we're building the adaptive and information system in a child's brain. So they're taking in all this information, and our job is to really engage with them and talk to them about it so they get help storing it into the right places in their brain so that it's accessible and usable later in their lives. Predictability, consistency equal stability. And so we can use that idea across the lifespan, but for this group in particular, when we create predictable, consistent ways of thinking, then we lead children into stable thinking, which then also later turns into certainly feeling, the importance of right and wrong, but also the flexibility to dance along the lines when it's necessary for a bigger benefit.
right.
So children are not mini-me's. That is a big takeaway. They do not have their frontal lobes online, and their experience of being any particular age as their parent is totally different now and not necessarily applicable to a child's life today. So like I said, me being 6 is not anything like my granddaughter or even my children being 6. It's just a different world. So we can't apply this happened to me when I was 6 and I did this. Well, it was different. So it's not helpful, and it doesn't apply. So
the back in my day line just doesn't work.
Walk
uphill
through the snow barefoot.
Uphill both ways. Yeah.
Uphill both ways. Yeah. No. It does not work. So, we're coming in thinking about the long game here. We're always thinking about the long game. You got 6 to 12-year-olds, and we want to get them through into their adult life. And what do we want them to be like? We want them to be thinkers, and we want them to be feelers, and we want them to be doers. How do we do that? We think with them, we do with them, and we feel with them.
Yeah.
Because then they learn how to do that as well. And then they're going to do it in their variety, in their way, with their own spice and, seasoning.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And learning to accept that is beautiful. And
absolutely.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, any parting words, Dr. B?
Oh, no, just hit out there and go leave a life print, however that works for you. So until next time. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you. If you're interested in booking a training, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at my website, Dr. B Connections. There's a big button that says, book a training with Dr. B. It's that easy. If this show has been beneficial for you, please share it with your friends and family. Spreading the word about the show helps us grow our audience and helps continue to change the world together. Again, thanks so much for listening to Delusional Optimism. Now, go leave a life print.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of Delusional Optimism, brought to you by St. Agnes Medical Center and Every Neighborhood Partnership. We hope you're encouraged by Dr. B's message and find her tips helpful for managing life's stressors and building a more resilient self. For more episodes in this special series, please visit St. Agnes Medical Center's website at www.samc.com. This episode is produced and published by the editing team at Truthwork Media. Truthwork Media is a full-fledged podcasting and social media agency located in South Bend, Indiana, with clients all around the world. For more information, visit them at truthworkmedia.com. These materials and all discussions of these materials are for educational purposes only and do not constitute medical or mental health advice. The presenter is not a licensed mental health or medical service provider. If you need medical or mental health care or advice, you should contact your doctor or therapist, or you can contact your insurance company for a referral. This show and all of its contents are copyright 2020 Dr. B. Leave a Life print. Reproduction or use requires written consent of Dr. Kristen Beasley.